London, 1845. The rain drummed against the attic window as Eleanor Campbell pressed her face to the cold glass, watching the first faint blush of dawn creep across the leaden sky. In her hand, she clutched a letter, the last connection to a life that had slipped through her fingers like water. Her father, once a respected professor of literature at Oxford, had died 6 months earlier, leaving behind nothing but debts and the tarnish of scandal. A failed investment, whispers of gambling, accusations of impropriety with university funds, all had combined to strip the Campbell name of its modest respectability. A lady without fortune is like a ship without sails, her mother had often said before consumption claimed her years ago. How right she had been. At 23, Eleanor found herself with no prospects, no connections, and certainly no fortune. The small case at her feet contained all that remained of her former life, 2 serviceable gowns, her mother's tarnished locket, and her father's dog-eared collection of Shakespeare. The position of governess at Thornfield Hall had been her salvation, or so she had believed when the agency placed her advertisement. Now, standing in the servants' quarters of this imposing country estate, Eleanor was no longer certain. The Graysons were newly moneyed, desperate to secure their place in society, and determined that their 3 daughters should marry well. The mistress of the house had made it abundantly clear that Eleanor's role was to transform the girls into accomplished young ladies, without drawing any attention to herself. "Remember your station, Miss Campbell," Mrs. Grayson had instructed with barely concealed disdain. A governess exists in that unfortunate territory between servant and gentlewoman. You would do well to make yourself as invisible as possible. Eleanor had nodded, swallowing her pride. What choice did she have? Without references or connections, this position was her only defense against destitution. She had seen what happened to women of gentle birth who lost their place in the world. The workhouse. The streets. Or worse. "I shall never marry," Eleanor whispered to her reflection in the glass, watching as her breath created a small cloud of fog. Love is a luxury reserved for those with fortune and status. For the rest of us, it is merely a dangerous distraction. She turned away from the window, preparing for her first full day of duties. The eldest Grayson daughter, Charlotte, showed promise with music but was woefully behind in French. The middle child, Beatrice, possessed a quick mind but lacked discipline. And little Margaret, only 8, required basic instruction in all subjects. As Eleanor dressed in her plain black gown, the uniform of her new station, she reminded herself of her purpose: survive, maintain dignity, and perhaps, in time, save enough to establish a small school of her own. Dreams of love, of being cherished for herself rather than her usefulness, were foolish fancies she could no longer afford. She was halfway through braiding her chestnut hair when a commotion erupted below. Raised voices, the clatter of carriage wheels on gravel, and Mrs. Grayson's high-pitched exclamations of surprise echoed through the corridors. Eleanor hesitated, torn between curiosity and her instruction to remain invisible. After securing the last pin in her severe hairstyle, she decided that knowledge of the household's affairs could only benefit her position. Eleanor descended the servants' staircase, emerging into the grand entrance hall just as the front doors were thrown open. A tall figure stood silhouetted against the pale dawn light, the shoulders of his greatcoat darkened with rain. Behind him, footmen scrambled to unload trunks from an elegant travelling carriage bearing a ducal crest. "Your Grace!" Mrs. Grayson's voice had transformed from its usual imperious tone to one of breathless deference. "What an unexpected honor! Had we known of your arrival, the letter announcing my visit clearly stated my intention to arrive this morning," the man replied, his voice deep and cultured, edged with irritation. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair and aristocratic features that Eleanor recognized immediately from portraits in the London illustrated papers. Thomas Grantham, the Duke of Westmoreland. One of the wealthiest, most powerful men in England, and, if gossip were to be believed, one of its most notorious. Eleanor froze, pressing herself against the wall. She had no business witnessing this scene. A governess should be neither seen nor heard, especially in the presence of such exalted company. Yet she found herself unable to move, transfixed by the commanding presence of the Duke as he handed his wet coat to a flustered footman. "My steward will require proper accommodations," the Duke continued. "And my valet will see to my rooms. I presume the east wing is prepared, as I requested." Mrs. Grayson's face paled. "Your Grace, there must be some confusion. We received no letter." The Duke's expression hardened. "I see. It appears your husband's invitation was extended without proper consideration for the details. No matter. I am here now, and we have business to discuss." Eleanor knew she should retreat, but at that precise moment, the Duke's gaze swept the hall and locked with hers. His eyes, a startling shade of grey, widened almost imperceptibly before narrowing in assessment. For 3 heartbeats, Eleanor felt stripped bare, as though he could see every secret, every fear, every desperate hope she harbored. Then Mrs. Grayson followed his gaze and gasped. "Miss Campbell! What are you doing here? Return to the schoolroom at once." Eleanor cursed clumsily, mortified. "I beg your pardon, madam." "Your Grace." She retreated toward the stairs, cheeks burning. "Wait." The Duke's command halted her escape. "You are the new governess." "Yes, Your Grace," Eleanor replied, eyes lowered respectfully. "Interesting." The single word carried a weight she couldn't decipher. When she dared glance up, his expression had shifted to one of cool amusement. "Mrs. Grayson, I believe I shall join the family for breakfast. I'm curious to see how my godchildren are progressing in their studies." Mrs. Grayson sputtered. "But Your Grace, surely you would prefer—" "8 o'clock will suffice," he interrupted, already turning toward the grand staircase. "Miss Campbell, I expect you will have your charges presentable by then." With that, he ascended the stairs, leaving Eleanor with a strange, unsettled feeling in the pit of her stomach. Something in his gaze, in the way he had examined her, suggested he knew more about her than he should. Impossible, she told herself as she hurried to wake her young charges. A duke would never concern himself with the identity of a mere governess. Yet as she helped the Grayson girls dress for breakfast, Eleanor could not shake the memory of those penetrating grey eyes, nor the certainty that her carefully constructed sanctuary had just become far more precarious. The breakfast room at Thornfield Hall buzzed with nervous energy. Mrs. Grayson, dressed in her finest morning gown, fussed over every detail of the table setting, while Mr. Grayson, a portly man who had made his fortune in cotton mills, repeatedly checked his pocket watch. "Remember your manners," Eleanor whispered to her charges as they waited in the adjoining sitting room. "Charlotte, do not speak unless spoken to. Beatrice, keep your shoulders straight. Margaret, no fidgeting." The girls nodded solemnly, clearly infected by their parents' anxiety. Eleanor understood their nervousness. The unexpected presence of a duke, particularly one as influential as Westmoreland, was enough to unsettle any household. What she couldn't understand was why such an important man would bother to breakfast with a family of mere industrialists, nor why he had specifically requested the presence of the children and their governess. The door opened, and the Duke entered. The morning light illuminated features that the shadows had concealed earlier: the strong jaw, the slight crease between dark brows, the mouth that seemed perpetually poised between sternness and irony. He moved with the easy confidence of a man who had never questioned his place in the world. "Your Grace," Mr. Grayson bowed deeply. "May I express our delight at your visit? We are honored beyond measure." "Indeed." The Duke's response was cool as he took his seat at the head of the table, a position that should have been Mr. Grayson's. Each girl curtsied as Eleanor had taught them, though little Margaret wobbled precariously. The Duke acknowledged them with a slight nod before his gaze settled on Eleanor. "And Miss Campbell?" "The governess who appears when least expected." Something in his tone made Eleanor bristle despite herself. "I assure you, Your Grace, I had no intention of intruding this morning. Yet here you are." A smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Tell me, do you find your position here satisfactory?" The question was inappropriate, a duke asking a governess about her satisfaction, as though her feelings on the matter were of any consequence. Eleanor sensed Mrs. Grayson's horrified stare but maintained her composure. "I am most grateful for the opportunity to guide these young ladies in their education, Your Grace." A diplomatic answer. He turned to Charlotte. "And what has your governess taught you, Miss Grayson?" "French? Music?" The art of answering questions without revealing anything of substance. Charlotte blinked in confusion. "Sir, Your Grace, Miss Campbell has only been with us 3 days." 3 days? The Duke's eyebrows rose. How remarkable that she has already made such an impression on the household. Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks. The Duke was toying with her, though she couldn't imagine why. She reached for her teacup to hide her discomfort. "Miss Campbell comes with excellent references," Mrs. Grayson interjected hastily. "Though of course, we know little of her background beyond what the agency provided." "Is that so?" The Duke's eyes never left Eleanor's face. "I find that curious. The daughter of Professor William Campbell of Oxford should have quite an extensive background indeed." The teacup slipped from Eleanor's fingers, clattering against the saucer. Silence fell over the table. "I'm afraid there's been some misunderstanding," she managed, heart pounding. "My father was a clergyman." "Was he?" The Duke's expression remained unreadable. "How strange. I was certain you were the same Miss Campbell whose father's unfortunate situation was discussed in certain circles last season. The resemblance is quite striking." Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. He knew. Somehow, this man, this stranger, knew exactly who she was and what scandal had reduced her to this position. But how? And more importantly, why would he expose her? "Your Grace," Mr. Grayson interrupted, clearly bewildered by the exchange. "Perhaps we might turn to more pleasant topics. The weather has been, actually," the Duke said, setting down his napkin, "I find I have a pressing engagement elsewhere this morning. Miss Campbell, would you be so kind as to show me the gardens before I depart? I'm told they're quite remarkable, even in early spring." It wasn't a request. Eleanor looked desperately toward Mrs. Grayson, who nodded stiffly, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Of course, Your Grace," Eleanor said, rising on unsteady legs. "It would be my pleasure." As they left the breakfast room, Eleanor felt the weight of curious stares on her back. Whatever game the Duke was playing, he had ensured that her position at Thornfield Hall was now precarious at best. The question was why. The morning air was cool and damp as they stepped onto the gravel path that wound through Thornfield's modest gardens. Eleanor maintained a proper distance, her hands clasped tightly before her. "You're wondering why I've singled you out," the Duke said without preamble. "Among other things, Your Grace." "Such as?" "Such as how you recognized me. And why you would call attention to my past in front of my employers." The Duke stopped beside a stone bench, gesturing for her to sit. When she hesitated, he sighed. "Miss Campbell, I assure you, if I wished to expose you fully, I would have done so at breakfast. Please, sit. The conversation I wish to have requires privacy, not the pretense of admiring rhododendrons." Eleanor reluctantly sat at the edge of the bench. The Duke remained standing, looking down at her with an expression she couldn't interpret. "Your father and I were acquainted," he said finally. "Not well, but enough that when his name appeared in connection with certain accusations, I took notice." Eleanor's throat tightened. "My father was innocent." "Was he?" The evidence suggested otherwise. "The evidence was manipulated by those who wished to ruin him," she replied, forgetting herself in her defense of her father. "He never embezzled those funds. He was many things, perhaps too trusting, certainly too proud, but he was not a thief." The Duke studied her with new interest. "You speak with conviction." "I speak with truth, Your Grace." "Truth is rarely so straightforward, Miss Campbell." He began to pace slowly before the bench. "Your father borrowed heavily to invest in a shipping venture. When that venture failed, he could not repay his debts. Whether he borrowed university funds intentionally or simply through poor accounting hardly matters. The result was the same." Eleanor stood abruptly. "If you've brought me here merely to slander my father's memory, I've brought you here because I need confirmation." He stepped closer, his height forcing her to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "Are you, or are you not, in possession of your father's journal?" The red leather volume in which he documented his investments and associations. The question so surprised Eleanor that she couldn't immediately form a response. The journal he described had indeed been among her father's possessions, a detailed record of his financial dealings and academic connections. She had kept it, hoping it might someday provide evidence of his innocence. But how could the Duke of Westmoreland know of its existence? "I don't understand," she said carefully. "What interest could such a mundane item hold for someone like yourself?" "That journal contains names, Miss Campbell. Names of men who would prefer their association with your father's ventures remain private." His voice lowered. "Men who might go to great lengths to ensure that privacy." A chill that had nothing to do with the morning air ran through Eleanor. "Are you suggesting my father's death was not natural?" "I'm suggesting that your possession of that journal places you in considerable danger, whether you realize it or not." Eleanor took an instinctive step back. "This is absurd. My father died of heart failure." The doctor confirmed it. "Did he?" The Duke's expression softened slightly. "Miss Campbell, Eleanor, I don't wish to distress you unnecessarily, but there are matters at work here beyond your understanding. Your appearance at Thornfield cannot be coincidence." "What do you mean?" "This estate borders my own lands. The Graysons, for all their new wealth, are deeply in debt to certain individuals whose names, I suspect, appear in that journal. Your placement here, through an agency with questionable connections, suggests someone is keeping you under observation." Eleanor's mind raced. Could it be true? She had thought the position at Thornfield a stroke of good fortune. The agency had contacted her, not the other way around. But if what the Duke suggested was correct— "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, searching his face for deception. What possible interest could a duke have in protecting a penniless governess? Something flickered in his eyes, an emotion she couldn't name. "Let's just say I have my reasons for wishing to see justice done." He glanced toward the house. "I've already stayed too long. They'll be wondering what we're discussing. What would you have me do?" "For now, nothing. Continue your duties. Give no indication that we've spoken of anything beyond the gardens." He hesitated. "But I will return in 3 days' time. If you have the journal, bring it to the library at midnight. If not, be prepared to leave this place. It's no longer safe for you here." Before Eleanor could respond, the Duke offered his arm formally. "Shall we return to the house, Miss Campbell? I believe we've seen quite enough of the gardens for one morning." Numbly, she placed her hand on his arm, acutely aware of the solid strength beneath the fine wool of his coat. As they walked back toward Thornfield Hall, Eleanor felt as though the ground beneath her feet had shifted. Everything she had believed about her father's disgrace, about her own precarious position in the world, was suddenly uncertain. And most unsettling of all was the realization that her fate now seemed inexplicably linked to this enigmatic nobleman who had recognized her across a room, a man whose motives remained as mysterious as the danger he claimed surrounded her. The next 3 days passed in a fog of uncertainty for Eleanor. She went through the motions of her duties, instructing the girls in their lessons, taking meals in the schoolroom, retiring early to her attic chamber, all while her mind churned with questions. Was the Duke telling the truth? Could her father's journal truly contain information dangerous enough to have cost him his life? And if so, what did that make the Duke of Westmoreland, her protector, or another threat? On the 3rd evening after his departure, Eleanor retrieved the journal from its hiding place inside her Shakespeare collection. The red leather was worn smooth along the spine, the pages filled with her father's cramped handwriting, columns of figures, names, dates, and occasional cryptic annotations. She had never been able to make sense of it all, but perhaps the Duke would see patterns she could not. As the household settled for the night, Eleanor paced her small room. Going to the library at midnight as instructed might be walking into a trap. Remaining at Thornfield could be equally dangerous if the Duke's warnings proved true. Trust had always been a luxury she could ill afford, yet now she found herself forced to place her faith in either a stranger's warning or her own uncertain instincts. At 11:30, decision made, Eleanor changed into her plainest gown and wrapped the journal in a scrap of cloth. Slipping from her room, she navigated the darkened corridors of the sleeping house with only moonlight to guide her. The library door creaked softly as she eased it open, the room beyond dark save for a single lamp burning low on the desk. "You're early." Eleanor startled at the voice, nearly dropping the journal. The Duke emerged from the shadows near the window, dressed not in evening attire but in a simple dark coat and riding clothes. "I wasn't certain you would come," she admitted, remaining near the door. "Nor was I certain you would trust me enough to appear." He gestured toward the bundle in her hands. "You brought it." Eleanor hesitated. "Before I give you this, I need to know why it matters to you. What connection could a duke possibly have to my father's affairs?" A humorless smile crossed his face. "A fair question. The simple answer is that one of the names in that journal belongs to my younger brother, Edward." "Your brother?" "He invested heavily in the same venture that ruined your father." Unlike Professor Campbell, Edward had access to the family coffers, access he abused thoroughly before I discovered the extent of his activities. The Duke's expression hardened. "What began as an investigation into my brother's indiscretions led me to a much larger conspiracy." "What sort of conspiracy?" "The investment scheme that failed wasn't merely unfortunate speculation. The venture was designed to fail from the beginning, a complicated fraud orchestrated by men in positions of considerable power." He stepped closer, his voice lowering. "Men who have since worked diligently to silence anyone who might expose their activities." Eleanor's grip tightened on the journal. "And you believe my father was one of those people? That he was murdered?" "I believe he recognized the fraud too late to save himself from financial ruin, but not too late to document what he had discovered." The Duke held out his hand. "May I?" After a moment's hesitation, Eleanor unwrapped the journal and placed it in his palm. Their fingers brushed, sending an unexpected warmth up her arm despite the gravity of the moment. The Duke moved to the desk, opening the journal beneath the lamp's glow. His expression grew intent as he turned the pages, occasionally pausing to examine an entry more closely. "Yes," he murmured. "It's all here. The connections, the pattern of investments, the withdrawals before the venture collapsed. He looked up at Eleanor, his eyes brightening with an intensity that transformed his face. Your father was more clever than they knew. He encrypted the most damning evidence within these ordinary accounts. Encrypted. Here. He motioned her closer, pointing to a series of entries. These notations appear to be simple records, but the initials and dates form a pattern that reveals the true nature of the transactions. Your father was building a case, Miss Campbell. A case that could have exposed some of the most powerful men in England. Eleanor stared at the familiar pages with new understanding. All this time, she had been carrying evidence of a conspiracy that had destroyed her father, and potentially led to his death. What will you do with it? She asked softly. Use it to finish what your father started. The Duke closed the journal carefully. But first, I need to get you to safety. Your presence here is no longer merely unwise, it's dangerous. If I've managed to trace you to Thornfield, others will soon follow. Where would I go? I have no family, no connections. You'll come with me. When she looked startled, he added, to my estate. Westmoreland House has wings that haven't been opened in decades. You can remain there, out of sight, while I pursue this matter. Eleanor stepped back. That's impossible. A single woman cannot stay in the home of an unmarried gentleman, especially not one of your rank. The scandal would be unthinkable. Which is precisely why no one would think to look for you there. His expression softened slightly. I understand your concern for propriety, Miss Campbell, but I'm offering protection, not seduction. My housekeeper is a formidable dragon who would ensure your reputation remains untarnished. She shook her head. Even if I wanted to accept, I cannot simply disappear. I have obligations to the Graysons, to the children, obligations that matter little if you're dead, he interrupted bluntly. The men involved in this conspiracy have already eliminated potential witnesses. Do you think they would hesitate to silence a governess? Before Eleanor could respond, a floorboard creaked in the corridor outside. Both froze, listening as footsteps approached the library door. The Duke quickly extinguished the lamp and pulled Eleanor behind a heavy curtain, one arm around her waist, the other still clutching the journal. In the sudden darkness, Eleanor became acutely aware of the Duke's presence, the solid warmth of his chest against her back, the subtle scent of sandalwood and leather, the controlled rhythm of his breathing against her ear. Improper as their position was, she found herself grateful for the steadying strength of his arm as the library door slowly opened. Is someone there? Mr. Grayson's voice called into the darkness. I saw a light. Eleanor held her breath. The Duke's arm tightened fractionally around her waist, a silent instruction to remain still. After what seemed an eternity, Mr. Grayson muttered something about seeing things and closed the door. His footsteps receded down the corridor, but the Duke maintained his protective stance for several moments longer. That was too close, he whispered finally, releasing her and stepping back. We need to leave immediately. Now? In the middle of the night. I have a carriage waiting beyond the eastern boundary. My presence here isn't as unexpected as I led the Graysons to believe. He tucked the journal inside his coat. You have two choices, Miss Campbell. Come with me now, or remain here and face whatever consequences may follow when those who seek this journal discover your connection to it. Eleanor hesitated, torn between the certainty of her current position, humble as it was, and the unknown future the Duke offered. Everything within her cautioned against trusting this man, yet something in his steady gaze, in the way he had recognized her father's innocence when all others had condemned him, compelled her to consider his offer. I have nothing packed, she said finally. No belongings, anything you need can be provided. He offered his hand. But we must decide now. In that moment, Eleanor realized she had already made her choice. Her life at Thornfield was merely existence, a holding pattern of survival. Whatever dangers or uncertainties lay ahead, at least they offered the promise of truth, of justice for her father. She placed her hand in the Duke's. "Lead the way." His fingers closed around hers, warm and sure. "Stay close. And whatever happens, remember that not everything is as it appears." With those cryptic words, he guided her toward a concealed servant's passage behind one of the bookshelves. As they slipped through the darkened corridors of Thornfield Hall, Eleanor left behind the last vestiges of the life she had resigned herself to, stepping instead into a mystery that promised either redemption or ruin. Dawn was breaking as the Duke's carriage crossed onto the lands of Westmoreland. Eleanor, exhausted from the night's events and the tension of their escape, had dozed fitfully against the carriage cushions. She woke to find the Duke watching her, his expression unreadable in the soft morning light. "We're nearly there," he said, nodding toward the window. Eleanor straightened, conscious of her rumpled appearance and the impropriety of their situation. Beyond the glass, an immense stone mansion rose against the pale sky, its architecture a testament to centuries of wealth and power. "Westmoreland House," the Duke explained as the carriage wound up the long drive. "My family has lived here for 12 generations." The enormity of the contrast between their stations struck Eleanor anew. This man, born to privilege and power beyond imagining, had no reason to concern himself with the troubles of a disgraced professor's daughter. Yet here they were, conspirators in a quest for truth that had already upended her precarious existence. "Your Grace, Thomas," he interrupted. "Under the circumstances, formality seems rather pointless, doesn't it? I hardly think we're about to enter my home in the early hours of the morning, after spending the night together in a carriage. If you're concerned with propriety, I'm afraid that particular horse has already bolted." A hint of humor softened his features. "Besides, if we're to be allies in this matter, we should at least be on familiar terms." Before Eleanor could formulate a proper response, the carriage came to a halt before the mansion's imposing entrance. A butler and 2 footmen appeared immediately, along with an older woman in a housekeeper's dress and keys. "Mrs. Winters," the Duke said as he helped Eleanor from the carriage, "this is Miss Campbell. She will be staying with us indefinitely as my special guest. Please prepare the blue room in the East Wing and ensure she has everything she requires." The housekeeper's expression betrayed no surprise at the early morning arrival of an unaccompanied young woman. "Of course, Your Grace. Will Miss Campbell be joining you for breakfast? I believe rest is what she requires most at present. Have a tray sent up once her room is prepared." He turned to Eleanor. "Mrs. Winters will see to your comfort. I have matters to attend to, but we'll speak later today." With that, he handed her into the housekeeper's care and strode into the house, already issuing instructions to his butler about correspondence that needed immediate attention. Mrs. Winters led Eleanor through marble hallways adorned with priceless art and ancient tapestries. "The Blue Room is one of our finest guest chambers," she explained, her tone respectful but reserved. "His Grace rarely places visitors in the family wing." Eleanor felt the weight of the housekeeper's unspoken assessment. No doubt the woman had already categorized her as the Duke's latest dalliance, a conclusion Eleanor could hardly blame her for drawing given the circumstances. "Mrs. Winters, I assure you, my presence here is not what it might seem," she began awkwardly. The housekeeper's eyebrows rose slightly. "It's not my place to make assumptions about His Grace's guests, Miss Campbell. Nevertheless, I would not wish you to think, that is, the Duke and I are not." Eleanor faltered, realizing how futile her protests must sound. Mrs. Winters' expression softened unexpectedly. "Miss Campbell, I have served the Grantham family for 30 years. In that time, I have learned that His Grace does nothing without purpose. Whatever circumstances have brought you to Westmoreland House, I trust they are significant enough to warrant his protection." The word protection caught Eleanor by surprise. "You know why I'm here?" "I know that His Grace has been investigating certain matters related to his brother's activities for some months now. And I know that he would not bring a young woman of gentle breeding into his home without serious cause." She opened the door to a sumptuously appointed bedchamber. "Now, let's see about getting you settled. You look quite exhausted, poor dear." As Mrs. Winters efficiently directed maids to prepare a bath and lay out fresh nightclothes, Eleanor struggled to reconcile this new development. The housekeeper's matter-of-fact acceptance suggested the Duke had taken her into his confidence regarding his investigation. How many others knew of his quest? And how much danger had he placed himself in by pursuing it? Later, bathed and dressed in a borrowed nightgown far finer than anything she had ever owned, Eleanor stood at the window of the Blue Room, watching as the Duke rode out across his lands. Even at a distance, his figure commanded attention, straight-backed and confident, a man accustomed to power and its responsibilities. What sort of nobleman risked his reputation and possibly his life to uncover a conspiracy that had claimed a mere Oxford professor? The Duke, Thomas, remained an enigma, his motives as unclear as the danger he claimed surrounded them both. As she finally succumbed to exhaustion, Eleanor's last conscious thought was that she had placed her fate in the hands of a man she barely knew, a man whose penetrating grey eyes seemed to see through the careful defences she had built around her heart. For 3 days, Eleanor saw little of the Duke. He provided her with appropriate clothing, access to his extensive library, and every comfort a guest could desire, but remained conspicuously absent except for brief, formal inquiries about her well-being. On the 4th morning, she woke to find a note slipped beneath her door: "Miss Campbell. Your presence is requested in the library at 11 o'clock. I believe I have made progress that requires your attention. T.G." At the appointed hour, Eleanor made her way to the library, a magnificent 2-story room lined with thousands of volumes. The Duke stood at a large table covered with papers, her father's journal open before him alongside several other documents. "Ah, Miss Campbell." He looked up as she entered, his expression animated in a way she hadn't seen before. "Thank you for coming." "I could hardly refuse, given the circumstances," she replied, approaching the table. "Have you found something in my father's journal?" "More than something. I found the key to the entire conspiracy." He gestured to the papers spread before him. "Your father was more thorough than anyone realized. He didn't just record the fraudulent transactions, he traced them back to their source." Eleanor examined the documents, struggling to make sense of the complex financial notations. "I don't understand. What does all this mean?" "It means that the investment scheme that ruined your father and dozens of others was orchestrated by a syndicate of 5 men, powerful men with connections to Parliament, the banks, and even the royal court." His finger tapped a particular entry. "The leader of this syndicate appears to be Lord Harcourt, the Queen's own financial advisor." Eleanor's eyes widened. "Lord Harcourt? But he's above reproach?" "That's precisely what makes him so effective." Thomas's expression hardened. "He and his associates created an elaborate fraud, convincing investors like your father to put everything into ventures they controlled. Once they had accumulated sufficient capital, they engineered the collapse of these ventures, but not before extracting their own investment with substantial profits. And my father discovered this. He began to suspect when certain patterns emerged in the financial reports. Being a methodical academic, he documented everything." Thomas closed the journal carefully. What he couldn't have known was how dangerous his documentation would become. Eleanor sat heavily in a nearby chair, the implications washing over her. "If what you're saying is true, then Lord Harcourt would have every reason to to silence anyone who threatened to expose him. Precisely. I believe your father's sudden heart failure was neither sudden nor natural. Thomas knelt beside her chair, his expression grave. Eleanor, I don't say this to cause you pain, but you need to understand the seriousness of our situation. These men have killed to protect their secret. Eleanor felt tears burn behind her eyes. I always suspected, but to have it confirmed. Without thinking, Thomas took her hand, his touch gentle despite the strength evident in his fingers. Your father was a good man caught in something beyond his understanding. But his careful documentation gives us the power to bring his killers to justice. The unexpected kindness in his voice broke through Eleanor's composure. A single tear slipped down her cheek. How? Lord Harcourt is one of the most powerful men in England. Who would believe accusations against him, especially from a disgraced professor's daughter and a duke known more for his scandalous affairs than his interest in financial crimes? Thomas finished with a wry smile. That's precisely why we must be strategic. He rose and moved to pour 2 glasses of sherry from a decanter on a side table, handing one to Eleanor. I've spent these past days making discreet inquiries. There are others who lost everything to Harcourt's scheme, men with influence who would gladly see him exposed, if provided with sufficient evidence. Eleanor accepted the glass, her fingers still tingling from his touch. What do you propose? A careful approach. We gather allies, build our case, and when the time is right, present it not to the authorities, who might be corrupted, but to the Queen herself. He raised his glass. To justice for William Campbell. Eleanor raised her glass to meet his. To justice. As they drank, their eyes held across the rim of their glasses. Something shifted in the air between them, a recognition, perhaps, of the bond forming through their shared purpose. Eleanor was the first to look away, unsettled by the warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the sherry. There's something else you should know, Thomas said after a moment. While investigating your father's connections, I discovered why the Graysons were so eager to employ you. The agency recommended me, an agency controlled by one of Harcourt's associates. Thomas set down his glass. Eleanor, they knew exactly who you were. Your placement at Thornfield was no accident, it was surveillance. They wanted to keep you close, to determine if you possessed your father's journal. The realization sent a chill through her. Mr. Grayson, that night in the library, may have been instructed to search for the journal. Thomas nodded grimly. Which means by now, they know you've fled with it. We must assume they're already looking for you. Eleanor's mind raced with the implications. Then I've placed you in danger by coming here. I was already their enemy. His expression softened. Besides, Westmoreland House is well defended, and few would dare move against a duke openly. But your reputation, my reputation, has survived worse scandals than harboring a governess. The corner of his mouth lifted in a half-smile. Though I must admit, this is the first time I've sheltered one for entirely honorable reasons. Despite everything, Eleanor found herself returning his smile. Your reputation for scandalous behavior is well established, Your Grace. Thomas, he reminded her. And not all reputations are deserved. Sometimes they serve as useful distractions. What do you mean? He moved to the window, looking out over the manicured grounds. The world sees what it expects to see. A duke known for frivolous pursuits and occasional indiscretions is seldom suspected of conducting serious investigations into financial crimes. Understanding dawned on Eleanor. You cultivated that reputation deliberately. Not entirely. Youth has its follies, and I've had my share. He turned back to her, his expression more open than she had yet seen it. But in recent years, I've found the assumption of superficiality provides excellent cover for more substantive endeavors. Eleanor studied him with new eyes. The man before her was far more complex than the notorious aristocrat described in gossip columns, a man who used society's expectations as a shield while pursuing justice from the shadows. "You're not what you seem, Thomas Grantham," she said softly. "Nor are you, Eleanor Campbell." His gaze held hers, intense and searching. A governess with the courage to flee her position in the middle of the night, trusting a man she barely knows, all for the sake of truth, that speaks to a character far stronger than circumstance might suggest. The unexpected praise warmed her in ways she couldn't articulate. For so long, Eleanor had defined herself by what she had lost: status, security, connections. Thomas saw beyond those losses to the person beneath, and his recognition of her strength touched something long dormant within her. Before she could respond, the library door opened, and Mrs. Winters entered with a troubled expression. "Your Grace, forgive the interruption, but there's a messenger from London. He says it's most urgent." Thomas frowned. "Show him in." The messenger, a young man in riding clothes covered with dust, bowed hastily before handing Thomas a sealed letter. "From Mr. Harrison, Your Grace. He instructed me to deliver it directly to your hands." Thomas broke the seal and scanned the contents, his expression darkening with each line. When he finished, he turned to Eleanor, all trace of warmth gone from his features. "It appears Lord Harcourt has moved more quickly than anticipated. He's filed a formal complaint with the magistrate, accusing me of abducting the governess from Thornfield Hall and absconding with stolen property, namely, your father's journal." Eleanor gasped. "But that's absurd. I came willingly, and the journal belongs to me." "Absurd, yes, but effective. The magistrate has issued a warrant for my arrest." Thomas's jaw tightened. "Harcourt is cleverer than I gave him credit for. By casting this as a criminal matter rather than addressing the journal's contents, he's attempting to discredit any accusations before they can be made." "What do we do?" Eleanor asked, fear tightening her chest. Thomas turned to Mrs. Winters. "Have the blue travelling coach prepared immediately. Pack only essentials for Miss Campbell and myself. We leave for Northumberland within the hour." "Northumberland?" Eleanor questioned as the housekeeper hurried to obey. "My hunting lodge. Remote, defensible, and known to very few." Thomas began gathering the most crucial documents from the table. "We need time to organize our evidence and contact potential allies. The lodge will provide sanctuary while we prepare our next move." Eleanor helped him sort the papers with trembling hands. "I never meant to make you a fugitive." Thomas paused, meeting her gaze directly. "Eleanor, understand this, I chose this path long before you entered my life. The moment I discovered my brother's involvement in Harcourt's scheme, I committed myself to exposing the truth, whatever the cost." "Why?" "Why risk everything, your position, your freedom, for this?" Something vulnerable flickered across his face. "Because 15 months ago, my brother took his own life rather than face the consequences of his actions. His note spoke of shame, of manipulation by men he had trusted. I could not save Edward, but I can ensure those who led him astray face justice." The raw pain in his voice stripped away the last of Eleanor's doubts about his motives. This wasn't merely an intellectual pursuit of justice, it was deeply personal, a brother's quest for redemption. "Then we go to Northumberland," she said with newfound resolve. "Together?" Thomas nodded, relief visible in the slight relaxation of his shoulders. "Together." As they worked side by side to prepare for their journey, Eleanor realized that somewhere between recognition and revelation, between danger and determination, she had begun to trust this complicated man. More than that, She had begun to care for him in ways that both thrilled and terrified her, ways that had nothing to do with duty or gratitude, and everything to do with the person he truly was beneath the ducal title. Such feelings were dangerous, she knew. A penniless governess with a tarnished family name had no business developing tender emotions for a duke, regardless of their shared purpose. Yet as Thomas's hand occasionally brushed hers while gathering documents, as his eye sought hers in moments of decision, Eleanor found herself powerless to stop the slow unfurling of her heart. Westmoreland's hunting lodge proved to be less a rustic retreat than a small, exquisitely appointed manor house, nestled among dense forests at the edge of his northern lands. After 3 days of careful travel along back roads and forest paths, their arrival in the midnight darkness felt like reaching sanctuary. "The staff has been dismissed for the season," Thomas explained as he lit lamps in the main hall. "Only the caretaker and his wife remain, and they're completely trustworthy." Eleanor followed him through the house, too exhausted from their journey to fully appreciate the understated elegance of the rooms. Thomas showed her to a comfortable bedchamber, promised hot water would be brought shortly, and left her to rest with a formal bow that seemed strangely out of place after the intimacy forced upon them by their flight. Over the following days, a routine emerged. Mornings were spent organizing the evidence from her father's journal into a cohesive narrative that would be impossible to dismiss. Afternoons often found them in the lodge's library, researching precedents or drafting letters to potential allies. Evenings brought simple meals shared before the fire, where conversation gradually shifted from conspiracy to more personal matters. "Did you always wish to be a governess?" Thomas asked one evening as they sat in companionable silence, he with a book of legal statutes, she with needlework borrowed from the caretaker's wife. Eleanor smiled faintly. "Hardly. Like most young women of my background, I expected to marry eventually. Teaching was merely a practical skill, something my mother insisted I learn just in case. She was wise. She died believing my future was secure." Eleanor's fingers stilled on her needlework. "Sometimes I wonder what she would think of what became of us after her death. My father's disgrace, my reduced circumstances." Thomas set aside his book. "I think she would be proud of your resilience. Resilience is merely survival dressed in prettier language." "No." The intensity in his voice drew her eyes to his. "Resilience is courage in the face of adversity. It's maintaining dignity when the world attempts to strip it away. It's fighting for truth when lies would be easier." He hesitated. "Your father showed resilience in documenting the fraud. You show it every day by continuing his quest for justice." Eleanor felt warmth spread through her at his words. "You speak as though you admire such qualities." "I do." Thomas rose to pour 2 glasses of brandy, offering one to her. "Perhaps because they stand in such contrast to the world I typically inhabit, a world where appearance matters more than substance, where convenience often trumps principle." "Yet you've risked everything for principle," she observed, accepting the glass. "Perhaps I grew weary of the emptiness behind the privilege." He settled back into his chair, the firelight casting shadows across his aristocratic features. "Or perhaps my brother's death simply forced me to recognize what truly matters." As the days passed, such moments of connection multiplied. Eleanor found herself drawn to Thomas not merely for his intelligence or his commitment to justice, but for the man revealed in quiet moments, his dry humor, his unexpected kindness to the caretaker's children, his genuine interest in her opinions and thoughts. 2 weeks into their seclusion, a messenger arrived with responses from several of the potential allies Thomas had contacted. As they sorted through the letters together, excitement built between them. "Lord Pembroke is willing to present our evidence to the Queen," Thomas announced, scanning one letter. "And Sir James Harrington offers testimony regarding similar losses in the East India venture." "That makes 3 credible witnesses beyond ourselves," Eleanor noted, organizing the correspondence. Surely that's enough to warrant an official investigation. Perhaps. But we need— Thomas broke off as the sound of approaching horses reached them through the open window. He moved swiftly to look out, his expression hardening. For riders. Not wearing livery, but moving with purpose. Eleanor's heart pounded. Harcourt's men. Possibly. Thomas closed the window and began gathering their documents. We need to move these to safety. The hidden compartment in the study floor, quickly. As they worked to secure the evidence, the caretaker appeared at the door, his weathered face grave. Your Grace, there are men approaching. They're asking after you and a young woman. Did you speak to them? No, Your Grace. My wife saw them from the garden and came to warn me. Thomas nodded. Good. Take your family and go to the cottage in the West Woods. Stay there until I send word it's safe to return. Once the caretaker had gone, Thomas turned to Eleanor, his expression resolute. They may have only suspicions, not certainty. If they find me alone, I can claim I came to the lodge for solitude after the absurd accusations against me. And what of me? Eleanor asked, understanding his implication. There's a priest's hole from the Catholic persecution days. It can be accessed from the pantry. He took her hands, his grip firm but gentle. Eleanor, I need you to hide there until I can send them away. And if you can't? His eyes held hers steadily. Then remain hidden until nightfall and make your way to the caretaker's cottage. He'll help you reach Lord Pembroke. The gravity of their situation struck Eleanor fully. After weeks of working side by side, of growing closer through shared purpose and quiet conversations, they might be forced to separate, perhaps permanently. I won't leave you to face them alone, she said with sudden determination. Eleanor, no. We began this together, and we'll finish it together. She squared her shoulders. Besides, my presence may actually help your story. What better way to demonstrate the absurdity of Harcourt's claims than to show I'm here willingly? Thomas studied her face, conflict evident in his expression. It's too dangerous. If they're not merely Harcourt's agents but hired men with more violent instructions, then 2 defenders are better than 1, she insisted. I may be a governess, but my father taught me to shoot when I was 12. A reluctant smile touched his lips. Did he indeed? He believed young ladies should be capable of self-defense. She lifted her chin. I won't cower in a priest's hole while you face unknown dangers. The sound of horses in the courtyard cut short any further argument. Thomas's expression shifted to one of resigned admiration. Very well. But stay behind me, and if I tell you to run, you run. No heroics. Eleanor nodded, her heart racing with fear but also with a strange exhilaration. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Thomas positioned himself in the main sitting room, deliberately casual in an armchair with a book, while Eleanor took a seat at the small writing desk, a letter half completed before her. They had just settled these poses when heavy knocking echoed through the house. Thomas gave Eleanor one last warning look before calling, "Enter." The door opened to reveal not the rough men they had expected, but a single, elegantly dressed gentleman, Lord Harcourt himself. Behind him stood 3 men who were clearly not servants but hired muscle, their coats bulging suspiciously over concealed weapons. "Your Grace," Harcourt said with a cold smile. "How convenient to find you at home. And Miss Campbell as well, I see. This saves us the trouble of a more extensive search." Thomas rose, his posture relaxed but his eyes alert. "Lord Harcourt, this is unexpected. I don't believe I've ever entertained you at my hunting lodge before. Nor would you have, under normal circumstances." Harcourt stepped further into the room, his gaze sliding to Eleanor with calculated assessment. But when a duke absconds with a governess and certain private property, normal circumstances no longer apply. I abscond with no one, Thomas replied evenly. Miss Campbell is here as my guest, by her own choice. As for private property, I'm afraid you'll need to be more specific. Harcourt's smile tightened. Come now, Your Grace. We both know why you've taken an interest in Miss Campbell, and it has nothing to do with her dubious charms. Eleanor flinched at the insult but held her ground, fixing Harcourt with a steady gaze. This man, with his polished manners and aristocratic bearing, had likely ordered her father's death. The thought steeled her resolve. If you're referring to my father's journal, she said clearly, it belongs to me as his only heir. It's hardly stolen property. Harcourt's eyes narrowed at her direct address. The ramblings of a disgraced academic hardly seem worth a duke's attention unless they contain libelous accusations against respectable men. Interesting that you should assume the journal contains accusations, Thomas remarked, moving subtly to place himself between Harcourt and Eleanor. Especially when you claim not to know its contents. For a moment, tension crackled in the air as Harcourt realized his mistake. Then his expression smoothed into practiced politeness. Your Grace, let us speak plainly. The journal contains financial speculations and unfounded theories that, if misinterpreted, could cause unnecessary scandal. As a friend of Professor Campbell, I merely wish to protect his legacy from such misuse. A friend. Eleanor couldn't contain her disbelief. You never once called at our home or corresponded with my father. Our association was necessarily discreet, given my position. Harcourt turned to Thomas. Your Grace, I appeal to you as a fellow gentleman. Return the journal, allow Miss Campbell to resume her position at Thornfield, and we can put this unfortunate misunderstanding behind us. I'm authorized to offer compensation for any inconvenience. Thomas laughed, the sound devoid of humor. You offer bribes in my own home? Your desperation is showing, Harcourt. Not desperation. Practicality. Harcourt's voice hardened. Consider your position carefully. Your reputation is already questionable at best. Add kidnapping and theft to your list of indiscretions, and even your title may not protect you from consequences. I was not kidnapped, Eleanor interjected firmly. I came willingly to assist His Grace in examining my father's papers. Harcourt barely spared her a glance. Of course you would say that now, my dear. But under proper questioning, who knows what details you might recall? A vulnerable young woman, coerced by a powerful nobleman known for his conquests. The implication hung in the air, ugly and threatening. Thomas's posture shifted subtly, a predator preparing to strike. Careful, Harcourt, he said softly. Threats against Miss Campbell will not end well for you. Threats. Harcourt spread his hands innocently. Merely observations about how certain situations might be perceived. After all, perception often matters more than reality, as I believe you're about to discover. He nodded to one of his men, who stepped forward and placed a document on the table. A warrant for your arrest, Your Grace, on charges of abduction and theft. The magistrate was most concerned when presented with evidence of your obsession with Miss Campbell, following her from London to Thornfield and then forcing her to accompany you here. That's absurd, Eleanor exclaimed. There was no obsession, no force. The testimony of Mr. and Mrs. Grayson suggests otherwise, Harcourt interrupted smoothly. They were most distressed by your disappearance and the Duke's suspicious interest in their governess. Thomas picked up the warrant, scanning it with narrowed eyes. This document is highly irregular. The magistrate has overstepped his jurisdiction. Perhaps, but it will serve until more formal proceedings can be arranged." Harcourt gestured to his men. "You have two choices, Your Grace. Surrender the journal and Miss Campbell to our custody, and we'll depart peacefully. Or resist, and face the consequences of that warrant, plus whatever additional charges might arise from any unpleasantness." Eleanor watched Thomas's face, seeing the rapid calculations behind his composed expression. They were outnumbered, and even if they managed to overcome Harcourt's men, the warrant gave their enemies a legal weapon to wield against them. Just as she feared Thomas might be forced to surrender, a slight shift in his stance told her he had reached a different decision. The corner of his mouth lifted in the barest hint of a smile as he looked at Harcourt. "You present a compelling case, my lord," he said, his tone suddenly conversational. "Perhaps we should discuss terms in my study. The journal is secured there, and we might speak more privately." Harcourt's eyes narrowed with suspicion, but after a moment he nodded. "Very wise, Your Grace. Lead the way." As Thomas moved toward the door, he caught Eleanor's gaze and held it for a fraction of a second, long enough for her to see the warning there. Whatever he planned, he needed her to be ready. "Miss Campbell will accompany us, of course," Harcourt added, "to ensure the authenticity of the journal." Thomas inclined his head. "Of course." He led them down the corridor to his study, a wood-paneled room with a large desk and walls lined with hunting trophies. As they entered, Thomas moved to a cabinet near the fireplace. "The journal is secured in here." "One moment." As he unlocked the cabinet, Eleanor positioned herself near the desk, acutely aware of Harcourt's men spreading out behind them. Thomas opened the cabinet, partially blocking Harcourt's view with his body as he reached inside. What happened next unfolded with such speed that Eleanor could scarcely follow the sequence. Thomas whirled, a pistol now in his hand, aimed directly at Harcourt. Simultaneously, he kicked a lever at the base of the cabinet, triggering a mechanism that caused panels in the floor to drop open beneath two of Harcourt's men. Their startled shouts echoed up from the cellar below as the trap closed again, leaving only Harcourt and his remaining guard in the room. "Drop your weapon," Thomas commanded the guard, who had started to reach inside his coat. "Unless you wish to join your companions." The man hesitated, then slowly raised his hands. Harcourt stood frozen, his face a mask of disbelief. "You've made a grave mistake, Grantham," he said, his composure cracking. "Even a duke cannot threaten a peer of the realm without consequences." "I'm not threatening a peer," Thomas replied calmly. "I'm detaining a criminal. Eleanor, if you would be so kind as to check our guest for weapons." Eleanor moved forward, her heart pounding but her hand steady as she removed a small pistol from Harcourt's coat pocket. "Is this how you arranged my father's heart failure?" she asked quietly. "Or did you employ more subtle methods?" Harcourt's face contorted with rage. "You stupid girl. Your father brought his fate upon himself with his obsessive record-keeping. He should have accepted his losses like a gentleman instead of digging where he wasn't welcome." His inadvertent confession hung in the air between them. Thomas's expression hardened. "Thank you, Harcourt. That admission will prove most useful when we present our case to the Queen. You have nothing but the ramblings of a disgraced academic and your own tarnished word," Harcourt spat. "Who would believe you over me?" "Perhaps the three other investors who have already provided sworn statements regarding your scheme," Eleanor suggested, a fierce satisfaction rising within her. "Or your former secretary, who has agreed to testify about the altered documents." Harcourt's face paled. "You're bluffing. We've had 2 weeks to gather evidence and allies while you focused on finding us," Thomas said. "Time well spent, as it turns out." He moved to the desk and pulled a cord that Eleanor knew would summon the caretaker from his hiding place. Your men will be held securely until the proper authorities arrive. As for you, Lord Harcourt, I believe Her Majesty will be most interested in how her trusted financial adviser has been defrauding her subjects." As Thomas directed the restraint and confinement of their captives, Eleanor felt a strange sense of unreality wash over her. After months of uncertainty, of fear and flight, they had actually succeeded. Her father's killers would face justice. The truth would be known. When the prisoners were secured and messengers dispatched to their allies in London, Eleanor found herself alone with Thomas in the study. The events of the day seemed to catch up with her all at once, and she sank into a chair, suddenly trembling. Thomas knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "Eleanor? Are you unwell?" "No," she managed, looking into his concerned face. I never truly believed we would succeed. That my father would be vindicated." "Your father can rest in peace now," he said gently. "His killer will face justice, and his name will be cleared. Because of you." She tightened her grip on his hands. "You risked everything, your reputation, your freedom, perhaps even your life, for a man you never knew and his daughter you had no reason to help." Thomas's expression softened in a way she had never seen before. "I had every reason to help you, Eleanor. From the moment I saw you at Thornfield, standing so proudly despite everything you had lost, I knew you were a woman of extraordinary courage and principle." "You couldn't possibly have known that from a glimpse across a breakfast room," she protested. "Perhaps not," he conceded with a small smile. "But I had been following your father's case for months. I knew of his daughter who had refused marriage proposals that might have saved her from disgrace, choosing instead to maintain her father's innocence when all others condemned him." Eleanor stared at him in surprise. "You knew who I was before we met?" "I suspected. When I confirmed your identity at Thornfield, I knew you were either an unwitting pawn in Harcourt's game or a potential ally in mine." His thumbs traced gentle circles on the backs of her hands. "I never expected you would become so much more." The tenderness in his voice sent a tremor through her. "Thomas, I know. Let me finish." His grey eyes held hers with an intensity that stole her breath. "These past weeks, working together, sharing dangers and discoveries, have shown me a truth I never expected to find, that beneath all the trappings of position and privilege, what matters most is the character of the person standing beside you." He released one of her hands to touch her cheek gently. "You stood beside me, Eleanor. You trusted me when you had every reason for doubt. You showed courage when others would have faltered. You've become not just my ally in this quest for justice, but essential to me in ways I'm only beginning to understand." Eleanor's heart pounded so fiercely she was certain he must hear it. "Thomas, you speak as though, but it isn't possible. You're a duke, and I'm a woman of intelligence, principle, and uncommon bravery," he interrupted firmly. "Titles and fortunes are accidents of birth, Eleanor. Character is the true measure of a person. By that measure, you outrank everyone of my acquaintance." The conviction in his voice shook her to her core. All her life, Eleanor had believed that love was a luxury she could never afford, that her place in the world was defined by what she lacked rather than what she offered. Yet here was a man who saw beyond those lacks to the essence of who she truly was. "Even if what you say is true," she whispered, "society would never accept such a connection. Your position, my position, gives me the freedom to choose my own path." Thomas rose, drawing her to her feet before him. "For too long, I've allowed the expectations of others to shape my actions. No more. This quest to vindicate your father has shown me what truly matters, and what I truly want." "And what is that?" Eleanor asked, scarcely daring to breathe. "You, Eleanor Campbell." His hands framed her face with exquisite gentleness. your courage, your principles, your resilient heart. If you can find it within yourself to care for a man who has hidden behind his title and reputation for far too long, I would consider myself the most fortunate of men." Emotion welled up within Eleanor, too powerful for words. All the barriers she had built around her heart, the certainty that love was not for women like her, the belief that her father's disgrace had placed happiness forever beyond her reach, crumbled in the face of Thomas's honest declaration. "I have cared for you," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper, "even when I told myself it was foolish. Even when I believed it could lead nowhere." Thomas's smile transformed his face, erasing years of carefully maintained reserve. "Then perhaps we have both been fools, too bound by the world's expectations to recognize what was growing between us." He leaned forward, his lips a breath away from hers. "May I?" In answer, Eleanor closed the distance between them. The kiss was gentle at first, a tentative exploration, but quickly deepened into something that spoke of weeks of restrained emotion finally finding expression. When they parted, both breathless, Eleanor felt as though the world had shifted on its axis, as though everything that had come before was merely prologue to this moment. "What happens now?" she asked, still held securely in his arms. "Now we return to London, present our evidence, and see justice done for your father and all the others Harcourt defrauded." Thomas pressed his forehead to hers. "And then, if you are willing, we begin a new chapter, together." The scandal would be enormous, she warned, practical even in this moment of joy. A duke marrying a penniless governess. Thomas laughed, the sound rich with genuine amusement. After being accused of abduction and theft, standing against one of the Queen's advisers, and triggering what will likely be the financial scandal of the decade, I think our marriage will seem rather anticlimactic by comparison. "Marriage?" Eleanor pulled back slightly to search his face. "Thomas, you cannot mean, I can and I do." His expression grew serious once more. "Eleanor Campbell, when this business with Harcourt is concluded, would you do me the very great honor of becoming my wife? Not for position or advantage, but because in you, I have found what I never knew I was searching for, a partner in every sense of the word." Eleanor felt tears spring to her eyes, but for the first time in years, they were tears of joy rather than sorrow or frustration. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you, not for your title or your wealth, but for the man you truly are beneath them." As Thomas drew her into another kiss, sealing their promise to one another, Eleanor realized that the path that had seemed so dark, her father's disgrace, her reduced circumstances, the dangers they had faced together, had led her not to ruin but to redemption. Not merely the redemption of her father's name, but the redemption of her own belief in possibility, in justice, in love itself. Dawn was breaking as they stood together at the window, Thomas's arm around her waist, watching as the first light touched the hill surrounding the hunting lodge. The new day brought with it challenges still to be faced: Harcourt's trial, society's reaction to their unconventional alliance, the adjustments both would need to make to bridge their different worlds. Yet as Thomas pressed a gentle kiss to her temple, Eleanor felt no fear of what lay ahead. Together, they had already overcome far greater obstacles than social disapproval or whispered gossip. Whatever came next, they would face it as they had faced Harcourt's threats, side by side, stronger together than either could be alone. "Look," Thomas murmured, directing her gaze to the eastern horizon where the sun was just beginning to emerge. A new day. Eleanor leaned into his embrace, savoring the warmth and security she had never expected to find. "A new beginning," she corrected softly. As the golden light of dawn spread across the land, illuminating everything it touched with fresh clarity, Thomas turned her gently in his arms. His eyes, no longer guarded but filled with undisguised love, met hers with a promise that needed no words. "You are my destiny, Eleanor Campbell," he whispered. "The one truth I never expected to find." And in that moment, Eleanor knew with absolute certainty that love was not, after all, a luxury reserved for the fortunate few. It was, instead, the most democratic of gifts, available to anyone with the courage to reach for it, regardless of fortune or station. She had found it in the most unlikely of circumstances, with the most unexpected of men. And having found it, she would never let it go.